we're going to be answering one of our YouTube subscribers' questions. One of the questions that was left in the descriptions beneath one of our last couple of films, and that was, can we solder? Can we successfully get solder to melt without putting the flame directly onto the solder or the metal that we're soldering itself? My name is Andrew Berry, and welcome to At the Bench's YouTube channel. So to explain the question in a little bit more detail, I was asked, can we have two pieces of sheet silver with some solder sandwiched in between with a little bit of flux, and can we put them within a third hand like this here and simply apply the heat to the third hand here and allow the heat to be transferred from these tweezers to the solder joint and successfully melt the solder? In this situation, I don't think that is going to be possible for a couple of reasons. If we're using some silver solder, some easy silver solder, it does melt at a slightly lower temperature than perhaps a hard and a medium, but still the heat required to melt that solder is far in excess of what we can manage with this little setup. If we try and heat up this area here on the third hand and get it hot enough, what's going to happen, because these tweezers are under a lot of pressure from the joint here, from the springiness from this joint here to hold them together, the pushing together will actually force the jaws apart, because they'll become so hot, they become so relaxed, so annealed, I suppose, and the piece will just simply drop out. So there's no way that's going to be held under tension, tight enough, hot enough to melt the solder. Plus, you're trying to heat up these tweezers and hopefully then allow the heat to transfer this way onto these larger pieces of metal, but also the heat is being transferred this way as well. So perhaps it could be done if you have something like oxygen and propane or oxygen and acetylene, but it's not really going to be a successful solder joint. You're not going to get the same control as what you would do is if you simply had it down on your soldering board and applied the flame, because you can apply the flame where you want the solder to flow. In this instance, it's not really going to be possible. I totally understand where you're coming from. If you're looking at very delicate solder joints next to very delicate stones, you don't want any flame near the stones, but still the heat has got to be transferred through, and I really don't think that is going to work. But there's always a but, isn't there? I'm just going to quickly show you now how we can solder a chain, or we can solder a jump ring without putting heat onto the joint. I'll rephrase that. How we're going to solder a chain or a jump ring without actually putting the flame onto the joint, or even putting the flame near the joint itself. I know I've just contradicted myself, but if you think about a jump ring, is a lot smaller than a piece of sheet, and a little chain is a lot smaller than a little bit of sheet, and we can use this particular technique in those instances, those circumstances, and we're going to simply use these little soldering picks. These are simple titanium, normally titanium points here in a bit of an aluminium handle. You can get them in all different colors. Lots of suppliers will stock these. And we can use this because if you're using even this, using these small little propane torches like this, you could easily melt, and you really want to try and avoid melting stuff, especially if you're using your client's jewelry and perhaps you're repairing it and so forth. So let me show you the situation, what we're going to do in this case. We're going to let me just simply cut this chain first of all, so we've got a break in it. And what we would do is the chain would perhaps come into us. Perhaps this is a necklace that we've got, and a necklace, or in this case an earring, is in two pieces as we've got there. Now what I would tend to do is go up and down the chain, have a look at the end links here, make sure these end links are nice and solid, make sure there's no gap in them. If there is a gap in them, great, we'll use that link with the gap in. If there isn't a gap, let's just cut through and try and cut through perhaps the original joint of the actual link itself. It's going to make life so much easier. I've got a third hand. I'm just going to turn this third hand around so the jaws are actually sticking upwards, and make sure the jaws come together really nice and close on the end as well. These have got slightly overheated. The tips don't come together nice and tight, so I'm just going to move those together so we get the tips coming together just nicely like that. You can bend them so easily with a pair of pliers. Pop them into position so we got the joint sticking up quite nicely. You're going to need, as I said, a soldering pick. You're going to need a little bit of silver solder, the tiniest little snippet of silver solder. Now, we're not even going to put the solder onto the joint. We're going to put the solder onto the soldering pick, and all will become apparent as we go along. A little bit of borax in this case, or a little bit of flux that we're going to use as well. We're going to need to put that up onto the joint to make sure that joint of the links do stay nice and clean. Let's put my visor on for this, and I'm just quickly bring the close-up camera in just to show you how we can solder a link, or we can solder a jump ring without actually having the flame touching the joint itself. We're going to just cut through a link, as I said, roughly where the solder joint would be. I'm just going to open that up, thread the other part of chain through, and arrange that in the third hand so that solder joint now is facing upwards. Just like that there. So the joint is right on the very top. The smallest amount of flux as well, just on that joint. Now we're going to get our soldering pick, and we're going to get a little bit of emery paper just onto the end. Just clean the end a little bit like that. I'd also put a little bit of flux on there as well. All right. Now we're going to get a smallest little bit of solder you possibly can. Let's cut that in half, and let's put that down on there. A couple of little pieces onto the block like that. Then we're going to warm up the torch, and we're just going to melt one of those pieces of solder onto our pick itself. I'm going to melt it, and we've got the smallest amount of solder on our soldering pick, and just see it right at the end. And now we are simply going to hold the pick right on the top, right next to where our joint is, and we're going to heat by here. So the heat is going to be transferred from here down towards the tip, and then when the tip is hot, we're going to touch that tip right onto that joint, and that little bit of solder will be transferred right onto that joint, or even a part of that little bit of solder will be transferred right onto that joint. So I'm heating it by here, so the flame is nowhere near the link. There's a chance I could melt the link if I went a little bit too close. The soldering pick's warming up. We're going to bring that point now right next to our link we need soldered. So we're relying on the heat from the pick to heat up that one little link, and the solder's been transferred. Wait for that to cool, take off our earring, and there is the chain all soldered back together. A bit of discoloration where the heat came from the pick, but we can easily put that in a little bit of safety pickle. What I would do is just simply immerse that little section in the safety pickle, but not the whole piece, just to clean up that little area. And that is how we can solder without putting the flame directly onto the jump ring. Now, as I said, it won't work in large circumstances like this, large sheets, or even sheets half the size of this. There's just not enough heat being transferred through from our third hand. The heat can go either way, and the jaws are going to bend. So no, it isn't going to work, but on small little jump rings, small little links like this, it will work. And don't get me wrong, there are several other ways that we can solder these very, very, very fine links. This is just one way that I think is nice and safe. You're not going to melt the link itself, and all you need is a little soldering pick. Don't forget, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Smash that little bell icon if that's something that you're into, and don't forget, please give this film a thumbs up if you like it. I'd love you to. Also share it with all your jewelry making friends as well. I'd absolutely love you to do that. In the meantime, my name's Andrew Berry for At The Benches YouTube channel. Take care, see you on the next film. Ta-da.